Welcome to the Sister Mentors podcast. Sister Mentors has been nurturing the next generation of women of color leaders for 25 years. Our work centers around the needs and dreams of women and girls of color in the face of deep-seated institutional inequities found in the educational system. The lives of over 100 women and girls of color have been changed by Sister Mentors. These women and girls have evolved in astounding ways, and with the help of Sister Mentors, they are on their way to earning higher education degrees, particularly Ph.Ds. On this podcast, I speak to some of the mentors and mentees about their lives and educational journeys. These women and girls will tell their moving stories of who they are, where they come from, and how Sister Mentors was instrumental in keeping them on their educational paths. Let's talk to Dr. Randi Gray-Kristensen. Her mother had fantasies of Randi marrying a French count and living in a castle in France, with plenty of space for her mom to visit, of course. But Randi had different dreams. While in Jamaica, she heard that she could get a grant to go to graduate school and write fiction. She would eventually cross paths with Dr. Shireen Lewis, right when Sister Mentors was just being formed. I'm your host, Kahmeela Adams. Thanks for joining me as we celebrate the bold past and fierce future of Sister Mentors here on the Sister Mentors podcast. Absolutely. So let's talk about you. Who is Randi, and where do your roots begin?
Wow. It's
a big question.
It's a long story. It's a long story. The place I feel most rooted to is Jamaica, which is where my mom is from, and I was raised very much by my mom and my grandma. I think that's a familiar story in many Black families, right? Mm-hmm. But my dad is Danish, and my parents met in Denmark and got married there, and I was born in Copenhagen, and then we all picked up and moved to Jamaica, where things didn't quite work out between them. And so my mom, who had migrated for the first time after World War II, migrated again to the States, but this time with a kid in tow. And she got her job back with the federal government. She was a secretary for the government. We're here in D.C. And if you're familiar with just government jobs, what that means is that she was qualified as a secretary, and so she moved to different agencies depending on where the openings were and what she could do. I grew up mostly here in D.C., and then when she needed to, she sent me home to grandma in Jamaica, which back in the day, if you were under the age of 12, you flew for half price, right? So this was a wise budget choice. And so I went back to Jamaica, and I went to boarding school up in the mountains for a couple of years, and came back full-time to the States, I think when I was 11, again to D.C. And so my mom was getting ready to retire. Her plan was that I would do 2 years of community college here in D.C., and I would be the first in the family on both sides to go to college. My dad was from a working class family in Denmark, and then we would move to France, and I would go to university there.
Which is a great story, which I know we'll get to.
Right.
But what did you feel, being the first generation to go to college, did you feel a certain amount of pressure?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty classic immigration story of the kids go to college and get a profession and help move the family up into the next class, whatever that is. I mean, I genuinely did not feel like I had a choice in the matter, that it was just understood that my next step would be college. But I also think my mother was not familiar with the systems of how it works, right? Because when I think about it, I could have applied to a 4-year school and probably got a pretty good ride coming out of high school. But instead, we went, when I say a ride, I mean, scholarship. Right. But instead, we went a more traditional, we don't have a lot of money, so let's go to community college approach.
Yeah.
Which was great. I had great professors, and I did, in fact, get a scholarship for the second year, even though it was, back in the day, this is the 1970s, community college was practically free, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, Yeah. I finished off those 2 years, and when it was time to move to France, I was feeling big in my britches, and I said, I prefer not to. And so I stayed in the States, and she went overseas, which was going back to her dream, right? She loved living overseas. Um, and I transferred to Georgetown, where I got a degree in sociology.
Wow.
But again, in that sort of, I don't really know where I am and what I'm doing. And I love the things that I studied, but I had no concept of what a career would look like. And I was pretty unmentored in that whole process. I knew what it was to have a job. I'd had jobs since I was 12, right? But I
Right.
didn't know what a career would look like. But the thing that,
Or what to necessarily do with like a sociology degree.
exactly, right? It had helped me to think about the world, though, and to understand the world. And one of the things that grabbed me was the idea of doing cultural work, of using culture to introduce people to places, concepts, issues that they would not ordinarily pay attention to, and to get involved in those issues in such a way to help change them. Right. So it was different from, we're going to lecture you about what's wrong with the world, but instead, let me introduce you to some musicians who are thinking about things that are happening in their countries. Right. Here's some artwork that speaks to what's going on in Cuba and that sort of thing. So that was my main engagement throughout my 20s,
Oh wow. Okay.
doing that kind of work.
And I know there was a certain dream that your mother had. It wasn't just about you moving to France.
That's right. I think it's a thing in Jungian psychology that the children bear the dreams of their parents, and this must have been her dream for herself. But what she wanted me to do was to go to do university in France, study languages, and become a simultaneous translator for the UN,
Oh wow.
and marry a French count, and live in a castle, and have a very lovely mother-in-law apartment for her space, and everything would be sorted if I would just cooperate
Right, yeah.
with
You
this.
can't blame a gal for trying.
That's right.
She had plans.
She had plans, but I came up as an only child, and so I was very bookish.
Mm.
And so when this proposal was floated to me, I thought, I really don't want to spend my life interpreting other people's words. I might be interested in writing some stories of my own.
Right. And at what point did you decide to go on for your PhD?
So I had the opportunity to go back to Jamaica when I was 25 or so. And it had been about 8 years since I'd been there, 7 or 8 years. And I had been starting to feel like a fake Jamaican in that process. And so it turned out there was an opportunity for me to live near where my dad lived and get to know him better, and run a small guest house and work with SisterMentors, which is a theater collective based in Kingston. And so I did that for a couple of years. And sitting out there in rural Jamaica, somehow I heard that you could get money to go to graduate school to write fiction.
And you're like,
Yeah,
what?
you died. There's no way. And I just started, submitting poems and things like that from there. So I felt like I was on that track. So I came back to the States, and I worked with a nonprofit for a couple of years while I scouted graduate schools. I took writing classes at the Writers Center in Bethesda, and looked at New York, looked at other places, looked at funding, of course. And it turned out that there was this really good fellowship to get a master's in fine arts at LSU in Baton Rouge. And I thought, yeah, Baton Rouge could work. South Louisiana could work. I went and visited, of course.
Uh,
It's like there's a Caribbean vibe here, right?
right.
Culturally, this feels familiar.
Mm.
And so I thought, well, for the work that I'm doing, maybe it can get a hearing in these kinds of classrooms, in this kind of space. So I applied, and it was the only grad school I applied to. If I didn't get in, I was fine. I'd continue my nonprofit life and my writing workshops up here. But they gave me the fellowship, so I packed up my life and I went. And there was enough funding after the end of the MFA for me to finish up the classes and the exams for the PhD. And I had one
Wow.
little research project I wanted to work on.
Mm.
And so I said, yeah, why not? I mean, it's a heck of a way to make a decision, but
Right. Someone does. It's like, what else am I doing?
But I did some market research, and at the time they said that there was going to be a big turnover in the professor class around 2000. That a lot of people would be retiring, and a lot of jobs would be opening up. And I also felt that between my undergraduate degree, which I finished in '82, and grad school a decade later, there'd been this wave of publications of Black women writers getting popular audiences, right? Alice Walker, Toni Morrison were both in books and on the screen. Multiculturalism or discourses of multiculturalism were in the air. So I also felt that it would be a more open space to work in than I would have imagined when I finished my undergraduate degree. So I took my little project and I got a dissertation writing fellowship. At the time, it was a minority dissertation writing fellowship at St. Lawrence University in Northern New York. Did a couple of years on that fellowship there, got hired into a tenure track job there. And the dissertation was languishing, right? It was 3 years into the tenure track. I hadn't finished my dissertation, but I had built curriculum in Black literature for the English department. I was the go-to person on a lot of multicultural issues and things that would come up on campus. So the teaching and service part of my life was full, but the research side was languishing. And again, nobody was really advising me on how to get through this process, right? I didn't have an in-house faculty mentor, which I hear more places have now. So I took a leave of absence and I came back to DC and I got a little tiny apartment and was committed to finishing writing this dissertation.
Gotcha.
And to pay my bills, a friend of mine had taken me to Sister Space and Books down on U Street, which was the only bookstore in the country dedicated to writings by and about Black women writers. So I was very excited about this location, and it turned out
this is home,
right? Yes, I'm like, how much time can I spend here? But they hired me on a part-time basis to do the cash register, and then they put out a newsletter, and so I became very active in putting out the newsletter. And then it turned out they needed somebody for more hours, so I was able to pick up more hours. And there was an amazing community space as well as a bookstore, right? So the bookstore was pretty much in the front, and in the back there was a big room where books were stored, but also there was enough space to hold meetings. To when writers were here, we could host readings by them. And there was this project that had just taken off, which was a peer mentoring group for Black women writing their dissertations.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure it even had a name yet. It was just, Shireen Lewis had got together with she needed to finish her dissertation. She was from Trinidad. She was accustomed to the notion of collective effort to get big things done.
Nice.
And so she reached out. I think she was working out of Duke University. She got to know some people who were at Maryland, at Howard, and the basis was no more than 2 people from the same department, so we didn't get too caught up in office politics, right? And the group met every 3 weeks and set goals for the following. Each individual set goals for the following 3 weeks, and reviewed whether the goals from the previous 3 weeks had been achieved or not, and what kind of problem solving could the group help a person do, right?
Okay.
The idea to just keep moving forward. A good dissertation was the done dissertation. So I was so excited that this existed, right? And right here on my doorstep, what a gift.
Right? Just right. It came to you.
Right? I was like, hello, please, may I come and sit at the table? And she said no. Because the table was full, right? And she also wisely recognized that there was a limit to how many people could be doing this at the same time, right? And be effective. So she's like, I'm starting a waiting list. When you get to about 4 people or so, we'll start a second group. And so, I'm talking this up to anybody walking into the bookstore. Hey, are you working on a dissertation by any chance?
Go get on that waiting list. Come on, we need.
And it really didn't take long. And then I was in cohort 2.
Oh, wow.
What was to become Sister Mentors. And it was so in keeping with the spirit of Sister Space. I don't know if you know the backstory on Sister Space.
No, I don't.
So, 2 Black women, Faye Williams and Cassandra Burton, shared a hallway upstairs in a building further down on 13th Street, which I never saw. There are different versions of this story. What I heard was that Cassandra was running a consignment shop, right? Come get nice clothes. And women were showing up in the consignment shop and just started talking about their lives. Here's what's going on for me. And it became a kind of community discussion space.
Oh, wow.
And Faye was running a small bookstore maybe across the street, but my understanding was that Faye was getting ready to go to law school at GW, right? But they saw that there was this interest, and they asked the women, what would you like in your community? And they said, a bookstore. And they were like, okay, we can do this.
Wow.
So it's like a why not moment, right?
Yeah.
And so there was a space at 15th and U that they got, and they called it Sister Space and Books. And it wasn't easy as 2 Black women starting a bookstore, particularly with such a distinct focus.
Right.
But they found some people a guy in Baltimore who would help them supply books. They found a brother with one of the big book distributors who would let them have some books on credit. And they got going. And so Sister Space and Books was born, and it was, yes, going to be a bookstore, but also always going to be a community space. And so they also created a nonprofit, the African American Women's Resource Center, to support the more the non-commercial book side of things, right? So they had a drumming circle for Black women with breast cancer and their caregivers. There were some tensions in the neighborhood between the traditional African American community and an Ethiopian community that was moving in. And so they set up exchanges between the 2 communities. I remember once there was an Ethiopian tea ceremony or coffee ceremony that everybody was invited to try and foster dialogue, right? Instead of tension in that way. So there was definitely a loyal cadre. There were book clubs that would order their books from us, right? So Black women's book clubs, etc. They held 2 national conferences about Black women in writing that were phenomenal. With people like Paul Marshall. They were held at UDC. They took books to events, right? They did everything that they could, but financially it was really tough. Mm-hmm. But they were managing. And then the landlord decided that they wanted to get rid of Sister Space and Books, right? And get somebody else in. The neighborhood was changing too, right? It's gentrification time. Right. Big time. And so my joke, my very not funny joke, is that you can tell the neighborhood has changed when the ribs joint is gone and the tanning salon has moved in. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So, what was your research and writing for your dissertation?
So I, like I said, I had one little small project, which was growing up in Jamaica. I read these comic books with the history of Jamaica, and they referred to these people called Maroons, who were Africans who self-emancipated from the plantation way before the end of slavery, and created their own communities and fought back, right? Oh. And I was like, nobody knows this story. Everybody thinks that it was a completely binary world. If you were white, you were free. If you were Black, you were enslaved, and nothing in between. I was like, but there are these free Black people all over the place.
Right.
Right? Not just in Jamaica, but everywhere. And so I was also interested in the psychological process of what did it mean to leave captivity, right? Being enslaved, and come into your own self again, right? To experience freedom and make your own decisions in a strange land,
Right.
right? And so I felt like I could see this process of marriage in a bunch of novels by Black women writers, as well as actual figures of the Maroon, of slave rebellion in some of their novels. And so I wanted to do a diaspora project. Can I say words? Um, so I used Toni Morrison's Beloved and the figure of Sixo as the Maroon, and Seth's journey as a process of marriage, right,
Oh
into
wow.
becoming her own best self, um, or feeling that she was always her own best self, but experiencing that. Paul Marshall's A Chosen Place of Timeless People, which is set on an imaginary, but we know it's Barbados, um, English-speaking island in the Caribbean. And Maurice Conde's first novel, Eremakono, where her protagonist has come from the French Caribbean to Paris, is alienated in Paris, goes back to Africa, right? Because I wanted to de-romanticize this idea of, well, it's a back to Africa journey. No, that's complicated too. Yeah.
Right.
But also comes back into her own wholeness. And I would add Toni Cade Bambara's The Salt Eaters to that sort of those kinds of books, but I didn't have time to put that in the dissertation. So that was the project, sort of bringing Marinage and Maroons to broader attention. And
Yeah, and in a sense, this is kind of like part of like in relation to your own lived experience.
in the sense of,
Um, I guess like I mean, and I don't know, you going back and forth from America to Jamaica, and then also like when your mother wanted you to go to France with her, and then you decided, no, I'm gonna stay here,
right?
and like kind of like that's in a sense you're like liberating yourself,
Yes,
and
I think
you.
that's an accurate reading. Yeah. No, they say all work is confession, right? So yeah, definitely that impetus towards liberation is well founded um, in my life, and then gave me a lens for looking at the rest of the world and where are those opportunities, and how do those processes work? Because as we know, it's not easy,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And
Um.
community is often part of it, right? It's also part of the storytelling in my dissertation.
Exactly. So, in a sense, in relation to in relation to you finding community with sister mentors, because before, like it feels like what I'm hearing that your path to the higher education and whatnot was kind of you're kind of felt like you're floundering a little bit, like you're just kind of on your own, just like the Wild West out here. Like you didn't really have any sort of like leadership or guidance or mentorship, and not at fault to anyone necessarily, but just that's kind of where you were. And now you've like found yourself in a community where you're actually like helping to be mentored. And how
That's
did what was that experience like? When did the light switch flip on? It's like, oh, this is what this is how it should be.
um, interesting that you should ask, because I was just thinking that the moment that I recognized the difference between being mentored and not mentored was when I was briefly seeing a white guy in my Ph.D. program. And his professor was co-writing papers with him and taking him to conferences and doing all of this stuff. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that happened. I had no idea.
It's like that's a thing.
That's a thing. Yeah. So I became conscious of the absence of it then.
Hmm.
It was not going to happen for me in that context. But when I got to Sister Space, and then I moved on to St. Lawrence, where suddenly I'm in a faculty role. I wasn't aware that faculty got mentors, which I heard later from other people at other
Oh, really?
institutions.
Wow.
Um, but then I got to DC, and I got to Sister Space, and I got to Sister Mentors. And yes, that was when I was like, okay, it's no longer an absence. Here
Hmm.
it is. This is
Right.
what that looks like. And I will say that both that experience shaped my life, not only in terms of facilitating my own personal achievement, but also setting my own um, goals as a professor and as a teacher, right? And so
Right.
mentoring is very important to me. And I try to make sure that the young people coming through know about and have what I didn't have. Not necessarily for me to be their mentor, but to go find somebody,
Right.
right?
Yeah. And so now you teach at George Washington University.
That's right.
And how long have you been teaching there?
Ooh, 20 years.
Oh, wow.
1 years, 20. I started as an adjunct, and then
Mhm.
I had a 1 year visiting position, and then I got hired into teaching writing in the English department, and then they dissolved that program, and I got hired into teaching in the new writing program. So I'm not quite sure what my start date is. But
They're in about
basically,
20
yeah,
years.
yeah, fall 2000 I think was my first gig, and the one I'm in now I think started fall 2002.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, yeah.
And are there, what are some of your joys and or frustrations in teaching?
I'll get the frustrations out of the way real fast, which is everybody has something they complain about in their job.
Right.
So, teachers are famous. It's on the syllabus. Why don't they read the syllabus?
Right.
Why don't they do the readings? It's really sort of very ordinary things, and it's mostly
Right.
classroom oriented. Um, the the joy has been that in our writing program, at least, we get to teach topics that we want to teach,
Mm-hmm.
right? As
Oh,
long
that's
as
great.
we're helping students, we have a shared um, template, we call it, of writing instruction goals, but how we
Mhm.
get there is up to us, right? So
Oh, nice.
we want them to be able to achieve this, that, and the other as writers, as academic writers. But we can do what we want to get there. So courses I've taught have had themes like word, writing cultures in Africa and the African diaspora, radically rewriting America, and now I just have the giant umbrella of Africa and the African diaspora. And we've done everything from autoethnographies to ethnographies to Wikipedia entries to uh, who knows what we're going to do next with Chat GBT, right? But finding some way of engaging the writing not only with their own learning but also with public audiences in some fashion.
All
So
right.
they'll write a pretty classic research paper, but now I ask them to retell it in digital media form as sort of the last assignment for the class. And I have no tech skills. I mean, just be really clear. I fully admire your setup and your headphones and everything going on. I used to be a sound engineer, but that was back in the analog era. Right? But I don't have to have those skills. I can just say you
Right.
have 3 minutes to represent your research as a digital form of communication.
That's interesting.
And I get
Yeah.
everything from Instagram posts with the whole list with links and
Yeah.
things to, of course, the classic PowerPoint to one student turned hers into a short video campaign ad for her running for mayor of New York City. Another guy did a TikTok where he played different characters to be the different sides of the argument that he was working
Yeah.
on. I mean, just they
Interesting.
blow me away. They blow me away. They're wonderful.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. So I like that. I like that because of my theme. I often have very diverse, as they say, classrooms, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the conversations are not academic. We're actually talking about things in real life in the classroom, and then talking about how do these real life things lead to things that we can ask research questions about and
Right.
investigate further and maybe intervene in. Um,
Okay.
Also, because of my background, I sometimes get every other year I've gotten a course release to teach the introduction to Africana studies,
Oh, wow.
which has been just a tremendous gift in my life. Right, I get 30 students every semester who want to know what this Africana studies thing is and how to engage with it. And there are many ways to approach that question. Right, I mean,
Right.
many of these things have become academic disciplines in their own right.
Mm-hmm.
But I tend to, again, first generation, sort of loyal to outside the academy as much as inside the academy.
Right.
I tend to go back to the activist roots of quote unquote ethnic studies in the academy, right? That the idea of developing Black studies was to intervene in the issues facing Black people.
Okay.
And so in that class, I asked students to do an action project to choose something that they want to intervene in, do the research around the issue, and then design an intervention of some kind and conduct it. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
With the participation of the people who are going to be affected by it.
Yeah.
So
That's
again, it varies, right? Because that's a lot
mm-hmm.
in a 14-week semester. So sometimes the intervention is I made a website about Afrofuturism. Yeah.
Right.
And I've invited people to respond to aspects of the website and created this dialogue space on the website. But in other cases, people have done things like they have a program, I think it's in Boston, where um, they send black students out to the suburbs during the week to go to school, and they live with white families. It's a weird kind of busing kind of not busing kind of situation. And one of my white students, her family had been one of the host families. The student they were hosting complained of the sense of isolation that she had.
Mm-hmm.
And so the white student in my class proposed to the school board and got it to happen was that there would be a day off for these students to all get together and get to know each other.
Oh, wow.
So, and with social media now, it's easy to follow up on those connections, that kind of thing. Yeah.
It's like a very strange program.
It is. It's so paternalistic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so being able to, and then most recently I became a faculty mentor for a POSSE cohort. POSSE is a program that sends students in groups of 10 from the same city to the same university.
Oh, okay.
And you get a faculty mentor and a scholarship, and they're chosen because they show leadership potential. So these are really dynamic students. So that's been one of the great joys.
That's awesome. And how has Sister Mentors kind of helped you, the way that you go about mentoring and supporting the young women of color?
I think Sister Mentors created a model of horizontal power and support that that I maintain. That is, and I've also learned from athletes at GW that I've taught the question more of coaching as a leadership model, right? So rather than I've always been very participatory. I teach discussion classes. I don't lecture much, but the Sister Models, Sister Mentors model offer a lot of things. One is that we progress by bite-sized pieces, right? So this whole notion of I'm going to set a goal for the next 3 weeks, not I'm going to go to medical school, right? From my freshman year,
right?
Sort of near term, aiming for that feeling of success and then building on those feelings of success. Recognizing the breadth of the complexity of things that can create friction in our lives, right? Whether it's, I'm not going to get into any specifics, family issues, economic issues, housing issues, coming to terms with one's sexuality issues, mental health in all of its forms, all of those things that when I was coming up, typically you're supposed to leave them at the door, right? When you go to the classroom or other places. They come with us now. And we have a chance to address them and connect people up with resources and help, even if sometimes that help is just hearing.
Right. Yeah, it can go along. Just having somebody listen to you can go a long way.
That's right. And so creating atmospheres of mutual support as well also came out of Sister Mentors, right? Yeah. So I'm not always going to be with you, but you're going to be with each other and you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
You have these enormous capacities. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You recently received an award for your mentoring?
I did. I was so surprised. The College of Arts and Sciences at GW gives a mentoring award for undergraduate mentoring. And I was nominated, and students wrote letters of support, and I got it. Yeah.
Other than surprised, how did that make you feel?
I'm going to start crying. I was just really touched,
Yeah.
One of the things about being at a university is, they come through in 4 years and then they move on. And you have these interactions, and some of those turn into longer term relationships, but often they rightly move on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I got copies of the letters that people wrote, and they're just, the things that they remembered, that that had been just passing moments for me, but bigger for them, was a tremendous reminder of the impact that we have on their lives. And I felt like one of my personal missions, which was to give them what I hadn't had, was fulfilled. So I was really happy about that.
That's awesome. I can see how you were influential in a lot of students' lives. I would have loved to have taken any one of your courses.
Thank you for that.
What does having a PhD mean to you, and how did it change your future?
I don't know. I'm such a socialist. Like, it means I got certified for being a nerd. But the graduation moment mattered a lot, because I was there, and what they said is, this is the highest degree that you could earn. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yeah, I've taken this all the way that I could take it. And so I was very proud of that. And I also know that there are it's a tiny percentage of Black women who earn PhDs. Right. And so I was very proud of being part of that cohort and making it through and wanting to see it expand. It means I have a certain kind of authority. And once you get into the university system, which is also very stratified in many ways, it gave me a foothold, right? I'm an assistant professor. I will always be an assistant professor. I'm never going up for associate or the next rank, whatever. Okay. But it put me in rooms that I would not otherwise have been able to enter, which gave me a chance to say things that might not otherwise have been said or heard. And it seems I have figured out ways to do that have lent me some respect on the campus. And so, particularly when it comes to situations around students of color, first-generation students, vulnerable students, right, our vulnerable populations on our campus, I get heard. And that matters. That helps me make a difference. And it's not every room that I'm in, and, I'm still... there are places where maybe I ask somebody else to say it because I know they'll be heard. Right. But I get to bring that perspective to an institution where not just the institution itself, but even the knowledges shared in the various disciplines of the institution have been based on us not being in the room, right? We were meant to be the people studied, not the people expressing expertise and authority about our knowledge. And so that's one of the things that the PhD has brought, that has mattered to me, is being able to, if not shift a whole lot in my lifetime, certainly make the space for questioning it and make a space for the next generation that's coming in on fire.
Perfect.
To continue the work. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Randi, for taking the time to share your story with me. And,
thank you, Kahmeela. This has been a pleasure. You are a wonderful interviewer. I felt so comfortable because I was not somebody who does this very easily. So I am, you made me feel very relaxed and good to go.
For more information on Sister Mentors, a project of EduSeed, please visit sistermentors.org. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn as Sister Mentors. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts, and don't be afraid to share. This podcast was produced by Rugged Angel Productions for Sister Mentors.